Welcome to the latest episode of Gryphon Manor. Now, in the last episode, I returned to Andover and I built the village hall, and combined with the inn, it establishes the core of the village. Now, someday, that will be the heart of a busy pedestrian mall, and tourists will flock from far and wide to take selfies, eat at a nearby overpriced bistro, purchase cheap souvenirs for ridiculous prices, and, I guess I'm just getting way ahead of myself here. I also had to make some more tweaks to local villager management as they were still standing around and doing a whole lot of nothing, which is pretty much what they do anyway, but in this case they were doing even less nothing than usual, if such a thing's possible. However, I now think that Andover is well and truly on the right track and building momentum. At least the villagers no longer seem to have the collective intellect of a box of rocks. However, in this episode, I returned to the estate and the workshop to finally get around to building the smelting workstations that I've been putting off for so long. But before I dive into that, I want to talk briefly about some changes I'm making as of now. Now, if you remember, I went out of my way to build large cisterns to feed the steam engines fueling the base. And while it was not absolutely necessary, as I could have fed them with just a small patch of vanilla infinite water, I felt that I needed to stick with what I saw as the intended direction of the mod designers. That's just the way I roll. Besides, the cisterns act like glowing squid farms now, so that's an added bonus. However, several episodes ago, I also mentioned that I wanted to use the phantom rails from the Create Steam and Rails mod to create cool long-distance train routes that actually look and act like boat and airship routes. Unfortunately, I soon learned that each piece of track would require a phantom membrane, and then it dawned on me that I would spend the better part of the next few years hunting phantoms full time so that I could procure enough membranes to build even a small rail line. And since simulated air and water lines are just too cool to pass up, I started a data pack, and the first recipe I added was one that would let me craft phantom membranes from paper and amethyst. Which is easy enough that I can probably build at least one of these lines before my twin daughters finish college, and since they are currently freshmen in high school, that's saying something. On the other hand, it is painful enough that I won't be able to build a castle entirely out of phantom membranes. In other words, it is a reasonable and practical compromise. The point of all that was to illustrate that I'm committed to playing this game in survival mode and to building things up the hard way. But as I pointed out in the last episode, I've hit a performance snag, especially with windmills and water wheels, and I need to find an alternative. Now, of the options I discussed last time, the one that I was least likely to use at the time is in fact the one that I'm actually going with. And that is to say that I created a recipe that will let me craft a creative motor from the Create mod, but in survival mode. And now I will be able to use these for the most part to power stuff in this world, with occasional water wheels, windmills, and steam engines that are mostly for show. Now, this should free up the frame rate considerably and let me focus on the good stuff instead of trying to engineer around the aesthetics and performance. Now, I still feel a bit guilty about all that, but quite frankly, once you do a swan dive into modded Minecraft, the rules are very much subject to interpretation and bending. And since I have well over 200 mods in the mix, achieving any kind of strict game balance is kind of like trying to find Bigfoot, a unicorn, or an honest lawyer. It's a nice idea, but it's a complete fantasy. The other change is that I'm definitely going to move away from the emerald-based economy. Now, the market will run on coins, specifically the coins from the Create Deco mod, and so for now, I will spend some time going through all the vanilla villager professions and redefining the possible trades for each. Now, I think this will make villagers even more useful, which is a pretty low bar, I admit, but you get the idea. So how about that smelting, eh? The primary smelting rig will use encased fans from the Create mod and will smelt items through the blasting mechanic, which is basically blowing ridiculously hot air at something or a stack of somethings until the item or the stack are smelted. Now, there will be two sides of this rig. One will be semi-automated, where I will have a cabinet set up and items placed into the cabinet will be fed into a conveyor that will slowly move the material in front of a row of blasting fans, and by the time the material reaches the end, they should be fully baked. Basically like most pub goers at last call. Now, at that point, the material will be automatically deposited into main storage, and that'll be that. On the other side of the rig, there will be arms of depots set up where individual items, or stacks, can be set and blasted. The finished items will remain on the depot, ready to be picked up instead of being deposited in the main storage. And I think that will take care of most of my smelting needs. Most, but not quite all. So I'll set up some additional smelting options, and at the moment, I don't plan to facilitate any automated feeding or retrieval of those, but if there is but one thing I've learned while working on this series, it's to never say never. And while we're at it, one should probably never say clatu barada nicto either, unless they're prepared for the consequences. The smelting stations that remain would basically be those for creating coke, steel, and alloys through the immersive engineering mod, and that means I will need to make multiple furnaces. One for coke. No, we already did that one. Yeah, as I was saying, one for coke, one for steel. Cute. You know what I mean. Thank you. And finally, another for alloys. Alloys, not allies. I'm pretty sure Mr. Beast doesn't have to put up with this kind of stuff. Anyway, the immersive engineering mod also brings us the arc furnace, which is a large contraption that can easily and quickly smelt pretty much anything. But it uses a lot of juice, and it has parts that wear out fairly quickly. Now, I had originally intended on building one here, but after a great deal of consideration, I don't want to spend all my time babysitting and repairing equipment. And as far as I can tell, there's nothing major that I would gain from having an arc furnace that I wouldn't already have, though some things might go a tad slower. So I will skip the arc furnace for now, but I fully reserve the right to change my tune at some point in the future. Finally, I want to set up a depot on which to deposit stacks of coal, exactly like I have near each steam engine on this level, so that I will have a ready source of fuel for any manual smelting I might need. Now, it works kind of like a giant Pez dispenser, but instead of dispensing candy, it spits out coal. Now, I would imagine that it would make a great Christmas gift option for particularly bad kids and families with particularly cold and drafty houses. Now, all this smelting goodness will fit down the central aisle of the east side of the workshop. I was originally going to fit it all into 2 modules, but then I planned on having an arc furnace, and it's bulkier than I thought, so I decided on 3 modules. And then I ditched the idea of the arc furnace entirely, so I'm back down to 2. And this is exactly why I spend a lot of time thinking and planning ahead of time, because I would have spent a lot of time and effort in making the arc furnace for very little return otherwise. Just like doing my taxes. Therefore, of the 2 remaining modules, the blasting rig will take up almost all of the easternmost module, and the manual smelting stations will be arranged around the westernmost module. The western module is a little cramped as it runs between the red and green areas of the main storage system. As you can see here, the manual side of the blasting rig will be facing the other manual workstations, so in theory one could hang out in basically one place and tend to all the manual smelting. However, I think that most of the time I will do a drop and dash. That is, dropping off the smeltables in the automated rig and letting it do its thing and depositing the results into storage while I'm off running around doing my thing. After all, that is why I added all these modded bits in the first place, to save me time and effort. Because when it really comes down to it, I'm pretty lazy. Now, I already had the bricks for the coke oven and the blast furnace, as I needed to make some steel for the lift and windmills at the Watsaurus mine. But this time, the plan is for them to stay in place permanently. Now, I also learned a bit about the immersive engineering mod along the way. If you're an old battle-scarred, or perhaps burn-scarred, veteran of immersive engineering, then you already know all about these bits that I'm putting together here. However, if you are new to immersive engineering, as I am, or as I was, then it might be worth a bit of time explaining the complexities here. Immersive engineering brings a few new ores to the game, and they work pretty much like the vanilla ores. You go find them in the wild, you dig out the ore, you smelt the ore, and you have an ingot that you can use in a bunch of different applications. Easy peasy. But you don't need any of these fancy smanchy immersive engineering rigs for that stuff. No. These puppies are for 3 specific metals: steel, electrum, and constantin. Now, steel is the biggest pain in the butt of the three, so I'll save it for last. But electrum and constantan are only slightly more complicated than vanilla metals. Now, in the game, you need electrum for medium voltage wiring and components, as well as heavy engineering blocks, so you'll need a fair bit of it. And constantan is used in immersive engineering to craft thermoelectric generators, which quietly create electricity without a lot of moving parts, and thus without generating a bunch of lag, something I have come to truly appreciate a great deal. So constantan is a worthwhile resource as well. Now, both of these are created through the alloy kiln, which is kind of like a cage match for metals. 2 metals go in, but only 1 metal comes out. The fact that the surviving metal is something entirely new kind of breaks my analogy, but I'm sure you get the general idea. So in the case of electrum, you combine vanilla gold with immersive engineering silver, and for constantan, you combine vanilla copper with immersive engineering nickel. Cute. That is a nickel coin, but the attempt to sabotage me failed because the nickel coin is in fact made of the metal nickel. Well, at least partially. So there. So let's discuss steel. Steel's mighty useful stuff, and so it can be found in all sorts of structures and recipes. And in an industrial and steampunk-ish world, I will need heaps of it. And the mod authors knew this, so they went out of their way to add a little real-world complexity to the steel-making process. Kind of like adding procedural speed bumps. In other words, you can't just run around smelting steel ingots for more. For one thing, there is no steel ore, and without getting all technical about it, steel is actually an alloy of iron and carbon. So you'll need a lot of iron, and as fate would have it, I do. You'll also need a lot of carbon in the form of coal, and fortunately I have tons of that too. So far, so good. But the first stumbling block is that I cannot use the coal directly. I have to process the coal into coke, and that's why I need to build the coke oven, and one of the things I learned so far is that the coke oven is a bit of a bottleneck. I mean, you can throw in a stack of coal and the furnace is off and running, and that part's pretty cool. In fact, it doesn't get much easier than that, and when the process is done, you have a chunk of coke coal. So, sweet! However, you've also produced half a bucket of creosote. And while the coke oven can hold up to 64 coke coal, it can only hold 12 buckets of creosote. And once the creosote capacity is reached, coke processing grinds to a halt. So of your full stack of 64 coal, you will have only converted about 24 of them before you have to start dealing with the creosote to make more coke. Now, what to do with the creosote is not really the problem, as it's used to make treated wood, and there are a zillion uses for that stuff. The problem is the need to babysit the oven to keep removing the creosote, and I'm 99.9% certain that that is a deliberate design choice because it forces the player to come up with some kind of automated way to empty and or process the creosote. So yeah, I get it, and someday I will do just that, but for now I will keep emptying it with buckets. However, once you have your coke in hand, you can then pop it into the immersive engineering blast furnace, which is a very different animal from the vanilla Minecraft blast furnace. Add some iron ingots, and in a little while you will finally have your steel, along with some slag. Now, slag can be some pretty useful stuff, and with the use of my custom data pack, I plan to extend that usefulness. And then there is the create mod side of my smelting operations. Again, if you're an old hand with the create mod, then you already know all this, but for the rest of you, it might be worthwhile to talk about how the create mod has fundamentally changed smelting through the use of bulk item processing, which requires encased fans. Encased fans move air, and even at the lowest setting, they can move air up to 3 blocks away, and without any other considerations, that's enough to move items and entities. However, just the fan by itself won't process diddly squat. The trick to that is to blow the air through another material such as water, lava, or a flame. Now, of those choices, the one I want to discuss right now is lava. If you let an encased fan blow through a falling stream of lava, then the moving air on the other side of the lava will smelt whatever's in that block space, or spaces, including you and other combustibles. Now, this is called blasting, and one needs to put a little care and deliberation into the design to keep from cooking oneself. So, on the manual side of my blasting rig, I've set up 3 rows of 3 depots. Now I slowed down the power input to the fan so that they will only blow through 4 blocks. 1 of lava and the other 3 will be over the depots. So to smelt something, I simply need to put that something on one of the depots, and since the superheated air only flows out over the 3 depots, I can move around those depots without singeing my hair and clothes. Unless, of course, I decide to jump up onto one of the depots, and from that point I'm at the mercy of Darwinism. Now you may have noticed I've not made any mention of fuel, and that is the beauty of this setup. You don't need any. Charcoal is now an option and no longer a staple necessity. Another huge advantage of this operation is that you can smelt up to an entire stack of items at once. And while it does take much longer to smelt an entire stack than it does a single item, smelting an entire stack through blasting is still radically faster than it would be using a vanilla furnace or even a vanilla blast furnace. The only real negative thing I have to say about the process is that it generates 0 experience. With vanilla smelting, you would have gained experience when you removed the smelted items from the furnace, but using the create blasting process, no experience is generated. Now, if you can live with that fact, then you'll have a blast. Literally. So, the next thing to talk about is how to automate the blasting process. Now, like most things in the Minecraft universe, there's more than one way to go about this. However, I think the general consensus for easiest, cheapest, and generally best way to do this is to plop down your smeltables on a conveyor belt that slowly parades down a short line of fans that blast the items on the conveyor, and by the time those items reach the end of the line, they've been smelted. And that is exactly what I plan to do, with a little added complexity at the ends. A cabinet and a chute to queue up items to smell, and another chute paired with a storage controller to catch items coming off the line and put them into main storage. And voila, it's done. Now in practical terms, the vast majority of my smelting will involve me running down here, filling this cabinet with smeltables, and then my running off to do other stuff while the blasting rig does its own thing. And the immersive engineering furnaces will probably rank next on the list of frequency, but a very distant second. The manual blasting stations are likely to go unused except in very unusual circumstances, which I can't really imagine at the moment, but like I said before, never say never. In the next episode, I will be doing my impersonation of the Genesis device and radically terraforming the area surrounding the estate with a special emphasis on the bits between the estate and Andover. Now, I will be harvesting the existing trees, draining what remains of the river to nowhere, smoothing the contours of the land, and sealing up holes and caves to prevent accidental falls. Then, I will be building roads and a few footpaths, and then reforesting the whole shebang. This will be a big step forward in my plans for creating a specific look and feel for this region, and it's a taste of what's yet to come. So I hope you will join me and see how it all unfolds. But in the meanwhile, I hope this finds you and yours in good health, good spirits, and a touch of good fortune. Take care of yourselves out there. Cheers.